Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to getting, well, really well informed. Today, our sources, they've pulled together just an absolutely wild spectrum of topics. We've got everything from one of the slickest museum heists in decades to Germany's decades-long struggle with digital bureaucracy. And somehow that connects all the way back to a bizarre, 100-year-old experiment about whether we even need sleep.
It really is the perfect deep dive stack, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because, at first glance, these sources seem totally unrelated, but our mission, as always, is to look past the headlines, synthesize them. We're hunting for that central theme, and what really jumps out this time is this powerful thread of systemic neglect, the failure to secure or invest in or even just recognize foundational requirements. And that applies whether those requirements are, physical, digital, biological, or deeply human.
I love that lens. Yeah, It gives us a framework for understanding all this chaos, really, no matter where it pops up globally. So, okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with a really dramatic example of neglecting a physical foundation. That astonishing security failure at the Louvre in Paris. We've got some new, really granular details on the heist of the Napoleonic regalia.
Yeah, and what struck me immediately wasn't just, the fact of the theft itself. It was the sheer brazen efficiency of the people who did it.
It honestly reads like a movie script. The robbers arrived at 9:30 a.m., right after the museum opened. They didn't just waltz in the main entrance, no. They used a stolen vehicle-mounted mechanical lift.
A lift?
Yeah, to get up to the second-floor Galerie de Paul, used a balcony near the River Seine. Once they were inside, they used a disc cutter, like a power tool, to smash open the display cases.
And they were so fast, they grabbed 8 pieces of irreplaceable Napoleonic-era regalia. We're talking tiaras, necklaces, ceremonial swords, incredible stuff. They were inside for just 4 minutes.
4 minutes.
And by 9:38 a.m., they were gone. Escaped on 2 waiting scooters that apparently switched to cars further away.
And out of those 8 historical treasures, only 1 piece, a crown, was dropped, apparently. The other 7, still missing. But this wasn't just some clever, isolated crime, was it? The preliminary inquiry results, they laid the blame squarely on institutional oversight.
Exactly. It found that museum authorities had gravely underestimated the risks of intrusion and theft. And not just recently, but for years. It really speaks to that systemic neglect we were talking about. And apparently there was serious internal friction about where the blame really lay. The museum's president, Laurence Descartes, she acknowledged the failure, sure, but then kind of pointed fingers at the city of Paris.
Oh, how so?
Arguing that the lack of critical perimeter cameras, that was the city's responsibility, not the Louvre's.
The blame game. Meanwhile, you hear other critics accusing the leadership of prioritizing the big, shiny projects, the massive new Renaissance renovation, new entrance, separate gallery for the Mona Lisa, over-investing in basic, unglamorous stuff like perimeter security. It's that classic trade-off, isn't it? Flash versus foundation.
And that's the kernel of the insight here, I think. The failure was almost baked in because security just wasn't the priority. I mean, consider this specific detail. They used a mechanical lift to get to a balcony. Basic perimeter monitoring should have flagged that, right? But the single camera they had on the Galerie d'Apollon was actually pointed away from that access point.
No way. Pointed away.
Yeah. It's just a fundamental failure of design, of prioritization, systemic neglect in action. We've got an update on arrests, too, by the way.
Oh, right. What's the latest?
2 new suspects just charged. A 37-year-old man with theft and conspiracy, and a 38-year-old woman as an accomplice. This is on top of 2 men, 34 and 39, charged earlier. One of them was caught at Charles de Gaulle Airport.
Trying to flee.
Looks like it. Had a one-way ticket to Algeria, and apparently his DNA matched DNA found on one of the getaway scooters.
Wow, okay, so the net is closing, maybe. But that sense of vulnerability, it isn't just limited to the physical world, is it? We can kind of take that same theme, that foundational neglect, and apply it to an entire country's digital infrastructure. Let's shift from Paris's physical security breakdown to Germany's, digital paralysis.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Germany, global economic powerhouse.
Yeah.
But its experience with public services often feels stubbornly analog, needing patience, multiple forms, trips to different offices just to get an ID or register your car. That's still pretty common.
Right.
And that reliance on paper, on physical bureaucracy, that's why Germany ranks.
Yeah.
Get this, 21st out of 27 EU countries in digital progress.
21st. It's honestly hard to wrap your head around that for a country we associate with, like engineering precision. So to tackle this, they've brought in their first ever federal minister for digitalization and government modernization, Karsten Wildberger.
Right, Wildberger. He He's the former CEO of MediaMarkt Saturn, the big electronics retailer. He faces this absolutely monumental problem that's been growing for like the last 2 decades. You've got the federal government, the 16 states or lender, and an astonishing 11,000 municipalities.
11,000.
And they all developed their own IT systems over the years.
So how many independent systems are we actually talking about here?
The estimate is over 8,000 different non-communicating systems and portals.
8,000. Wow.
Yeah, it's a complete digital Tower of Babel.
Mhm.
Like every city government has its own custom software for doing the same basic tasks. The consequence, massive duplication of effort, zero data sharing. It's pretty much the definition of inefficiency.
Okay, so the proposed solution is this Deutschland stack, the D stack.
Exactly. The D-Stack aims to create a standardized IT infrastructure, common cloud services, something that can act as a reliable backbone across the whole country.
Oh.
But here's the systemic challenge, right? Wildberger is constantly getting compared to Estonia,
Estonia, the digital superstar.
the gold standard, yeah, where virtually all public services are online. Residents only have to provide their data once, and the systems are standardized but also decentralized. Works beautifully.
That's the dream. But in Germany, the actual structure, the federal system itself, seems to fight against that kind of standardization. Is this purely a tech challenge, or is it really political? A battle between the federal government and those 16 powerful states?
Oh, it's absolutely political and cultural, massively so. Germany's traditionally deep obsession with data protection and privacy. I mean, it's rooted in valid historical concerns, of course.
Sure.
But it has acted as this huge brake on the kind of data standardization and sharing you need to build a unified system. They don't just need to, digitize paper forms. They need massive political agreement to fundamentally change the relationship between the federal government, the states, the local governments, and the citizens' data. And that foundational policy shift, that's way harder than just fixing a bad piece of software.
That contrast is really stark, isn't it? Failing to secure a physical museum, failing to standardize a digital state, both down to neglecting the foundations. But let's shift focus now to a far more immediate and, frankly, visceral human cost. We're moving to the devastating and often overlooked needs faced by political prisoners in Russia.
Yeah, this is where we move from that sort of systemic neglect of infrastructure to the neglect of basic human necessity under intense authoritarian pressure. The source material we looked at details this incredible struggle just to provide incarcerated activists with basic goods.
We read the account of Julia, an activist who spent months without basic necessities because she didn't have family support outside. She recounts having to cut her fingernails with like an old razor blade.
Yeah.
The most desperate needs are shockingly mundane things: soap, toilet paper, towels, and critically legal costs.
Legal costs are huge. They're often the ultimate financial strain on these families. There's the case of Yevgeny Bestusev, a political scientist who criticized the war in Ukraine. A good lawyer managed to get him a suspended sentence instead of immediate prison time.
Right.
That's the difference between a family being completely torn apart or not. But those lawyers, they come at a really punishing price.
And what's fascinating and honestly heartbreaking is the trend in aid. The number of political prisoners has grown, right? Up to around 1,500 now.
Yeah, roughly.
Yet donations have actually decreased significantly. Why is that? Is it the rising costs in Russia? Public fatigue?
It seems to be a combination of those things. The drop in support is really quite staggering. Projects like You Are Not Alone, they reported that the average donated amount per prisoner just dropped sharply, from about 30,000 rubles in 2024 down to just 10,000 rubles in 2025.
Wow, that's a 2/3 drop. A 66% drop in aid per person in just 1 year. That's severity. It speaks volumes, doesn't it?
About the financial strain on families who are already struggling in a wartime economy. They're often forced to choose between, say, sending a prison package, paying for their kids' sports or schooling, or maybe buying medicine for elderly parents. Exactly. And the logistics are also designed to be incredibly frustrating. Many relatives and prisoners themselves, they fear publicity. They don't want attention drawn to their case. Understandable. Which makes fundraising for anonymous cases incredibly slow.
Yeah.
The sources say it can take over 6 months just to collect something like 100,000 rubles, which isn't a huge amount in the grand scheme of legal fees. Plus, organizations have to navigate rules like only accepting donations from within Russia to avoid their bank accounts being frozen. And there are specific limits, too. Male prisoners are strictly limited to only 6 packages a year. Women aren't, interestingly.
It sounds like a deliberate bureaucratic stranglehold on just basic humanitarian support.
It really does.
That battle for basic needs under political duress, It provides such a stark counterpoint to the immediate necessity of rescue when you're facing sudden climate catastrophe. So, moving from conflict's slow burn to nature's immediate crisis, let's look at the tragedy in Kenya just this past weekend.
Yeah, heavy, unseasonable rains hit western Kenya, led to a catastrophic landslide late on Friday in the Marakwet East County.
The destruction was swift, killed at least 21 people, with 30 more reported missing as of our sources. And the rescue efforts were just immensely complicated, weren't they? Largely because the landslide itself destroyed crucial road networks and local infrastructure.
That's right. 25 seriously injured people actually had to be airlifted to the city of Eldoret, which just underscores how critical functioning infrastructure is during a crisis like this. Kenyan authorities have been urging residents near seasonal rivers and known landslide areas to move to safer ground.
This raises that necessary question, though, doesn't it? When does a natural disaster stop being a surprise?
That's the key point. Scientists are pretty unequivocally linking these increasingly frequent, increasingly severe extreme weather events directly to climate change. This isn't some isolated incident. It's part of a pattern that's already caused huge destruction and hundreds of deaths in Kenya just in recent years. The vulnerability is structural, really. Tied to geography, yes, but amplified by changing climate patterns.
Okay, let's take a couple of quick, deeper dives now into some of the political dynamics we touched on. First, the surprising political success, maybe, of Serbia's student protesters. A year after a national tragedy, they seem to have managed to do something the traditional opposition parties just couldn't: pierce the ruling party's seemingly impenetrable traditional electorate.
It's really interesting. The students showed this remarkable integrity and, maybe more importantly, a deliberately non-political approach. That sidestepped the regime's usual smear tactics. Political scientist Srđan Fijic noted something interesting. The regime had successfully managed to make traditional party politics look, well, utterly disgusting to much of the population.
Right.
The student movement, though, it presented this challenge rooted in genuine moral outrage about the tragedy and the government's response. That made it much harder for President Vučić to just discredit them as easily as he dismisses the regular opposition parties.
And that perhaps explains the dramatic shift in tone from the president himself. After initially dismissing them as trying to start a color revolution, he actually apologized for his fiery rhetoric.
Which was completely, utterly rejected by the students. Their response basically, you have blood on your hands. It just demonstrates the moral authority they've gained by focusing on foundational issues like integrity and accountability, not partisan politics.
Okay, next quick dive. The controversy over Nigeria and the U.S. watch list on religious freedom. Former U.S. President Trump apparently re-added Nigeria to this list, citing claims of an existential threat to Christianity and stating that radical Islamists are responsible for this mass slaughter.
Yeah, the context here is really crucial. Those claims were made without providing specific details or evidence, and they immediately generated this intense backlash from Nigeria's leadership.
So how did President Bola Ahmed Tinubu and the foreign ministry respond?
They pushed back hard, so the designation just doesn't reflect the reality on the ground. They emphasized that religious freedom and tolerance are core tenets of the country, pointing out that Nigeria's population is almost equally divided between Muslims and Christians. And while, yes, Islamist groups like Boko Haram absolutely conduct brutal attacks, the reality is often complex. The majority of their victims are frequently Muslims in the north.
Right, so the violence is far more complex than just a simple religious binary.
Absolutely. The sources remind us that much of the violence that gets cited in these kinds of reports is actually rooted in communal and ethnic conflicts, specifically long-standing conflicts over land and water resources. These are often exacerbated by climate change and population pressure. It's not purely religious persecution in many cases. So that U.S. designation, critics argue, really oversimplifies a very volatile, multifaceted crisis.
Okay, here's where we make that pivot, the one that connects all of these global challenges, security failures, digital chaos, human need, political friction, to something deeply personal and biological. Let's jump back 100 years, to 1925, to a truly bizarre historical deep dive. A curiosity of science designed to prove that sleep was merely a tragic waste of time.
It sounds crazy now, doesn't it? George Washington University professor Frederick August Moss genuinely thought sleep was nothing more than a bad, useless habit we could break. So in August of 1925, he gathered 7 ambitious undergraduates, including Thelma Hunt, who actually went on to become a prominent department head herself down in Foggy Bottom.
Nowhere.
The goal was simple, if grueling: Stay awake for 60 straight hours.
60 hours. Can you even imagine the sheer willpower involved? Probably fueled by sheer academic ego, right? They were apparently trying everything to stay alert, driving through the Virginia countryside, playing baseball, singing songs, anything to fight off the drowsiness. And they were subjected to intelligence tests and tasks like parallel parking a car to test their obviously diminishing alertness.
And Moss's initial conclusion, published back then, just shows how profoundly we misunderstood the biological foundation of rest. He concluded, and I quote, "Too much sleep, like too much intoxication, actually may be harmful, deadening the activities of mind and body."
Wow.
The clear implication was that less sleep meant more productivity, more life.
What a complete reversal from what we know now. Modern science completely flips that premise on its head, doesn't it? We now know sleep isn't some passive state that just wastes time. It's active, essential biological work.
Absolutely. We have tools now that Moss could only have dreamed of, things like optogenetics, deep ultrasound imaging. These let us actually see what's happening during those hours of supposed wasted time. The brain is incredibly busy consolidating memories, performing essential repairs, and crucially clearing out metabolic toxins. Specifically things like beta amyloid, which we now know is strongly linked to Alzheimer's disease.
And let's not forget the immune system. It basically recharges its batteries during deep sleep, right? It's a fundamental investment in our foundational health.
It is the ultimate foundation, really.
Okay.
But here's the interesting twist that kind of brings us back in a way to Moss's original, though clearly misinformed, concern about too much sleep. Recent, really extensive epidemiological analysis shows this distinct U-shaped relationship between sleep duration and overall health outcome.
A U shape, meaning that, okay, not only is sleeping too little risky, but sleeping too much also correlates with higher health risks.
Precisely. For the vast majority of adults, the sweet spot, the bottom of that U, the period of lowest risk, is pretty clearly defined. It's somewhere between 7 and 9 hours a night.
Okay, why is that nuance important? Because people often hear that and they assume, oh no, oversleeping is causing problems.
Yeah, and that's crucial understanding the correlation versus causation. Oversleeping itself, like spending 10 or 11 hours in bed habitually, is generally not the direct cause of poor health. It is, however, often a correlation, or maybe more accurately, a critical signal, a red flag. It often points to serious underlying issues, things like clinical depression, undiagnosed sleep apnea, maybe a chronic illness that's requiring extra restorative time from the body. So habitual oversleeping isn't the problem itself, it's your body trying to tell you something else is wrong.
Right. And finally, what about consistency? Is it just about the hours?
No, not at all. The emerging research really emphasizes that consistency is just as vital as duration. Having regular bedtimes and wake times creating that solid sleep foundation contributes significantly to lower risks of obesity, cardiovascular disease, mood disorders, the list goes on. So it's not just about how long you're out for, it's about how reliable and regular your sleep routine is.
What an incredible intellectual journey we've taken. We kicked off by observing how global institutions fail when they neglect those foundational requirements, physical security at the Louvre, digital standardization in Germany's IT chaos. Then we moved to the really crushing human cost arising from immediate crises, whether that's the logistical nightmare of trying to support Russian political prisoners or the infrastructure devastation from the Kenya landslide.
And the central takeaway, the thing that really ties all these disparate fields together for you, the listener, is that theme of foundation. Knowledge comes from connecting these dots. We see that a failure to invest in a simple camera system at a museum, that's a failure of foundation. Just like the failure to standardize 8,000 separate IT systems across a federal government is a failure of foundation. And then, biologically, we see this profound, century-long scientific shift from believing sleep was just a tragic waste to recognizing it as perhaps the most essential biological foundation for our cognitive and physical health.
So here's something to think about tonight, maybe as you're drifting off. Or perhaps if you notice yourself sleeping quite a bit more than usual. Those 1925 students, they proved they could stay awake for 60 hours, sure. But today we know sleep is an investment, not an expense. So if habitually sleeping more than those 9 hours is correlated with serious underlying health issues, consider this. What essential biological process might your body be desperately trying to signal when you habitually oversleep? What underlying condition might be demanding all that extra restoration time? That's your signal to explore further.